Well, I'm a writer. Started out in radio with Mark. We were a writing partnership for 10 years or 12 years or something. Writing comedy for radio, then comedy for TV, Spitting Image, and we wrote a sitcom and we wrote sketch shows. And then we worked together on the first Chicken Run film, coming onto that. And then I went off and wrote books for 10 years, novels and non-fiction. And Mark went off and wrote movies. And then, so ever since, I've been better known as a book writer than anything else, though I have done some theatre as well. So that's me, just comedy writing, really, just whatever makes me laugh.
Yes, so as John said, we worked together for a while back in the old days, and then our paths diverged a little bit. And I've stayed doing a lot of things at Aardman. I ended up directing at Aardman, and I'm now doing some producing at Aardman as well. So I guess I would define myself as a comedy writer stroke director. And I seem to have spent a lot of my career doing animation. I never really set out to do that, but I enjoy it very much.
I was the opposite. I definitely set out to be in animation. I set out to be a character animator, and I found myself at Aardman working on Chicken Run, and then on Were Rabbit, Wallace and Gromit, Curse the Were Rabbit. I slipped into directing. I was second unit director, and I slowly stopped animating and directed more, and about 10 years ago became creative director of Wallace and Gromit.
So if Spitting Image returned, would you like to be involved? And if so, which celebrity or politician would you find most enjoyable to satirise?
That's a very good question. I think Spitting Image is returning, actually, and I've been in contact with Roger Law, who is the sort of founder of it. The honest answer is, I think having done that very intensely for like 12 or 13 series, I'm not sure I want to go back to writing that sort of stuff. And it needs a new generation of satirists, I think, to be lampooning those characters. You could have enormous fun with Donald Trump and Boris Johnson and the Kardashians and some of the celebrities, but you'd probably be a better judge of which celebrities would be fun to make puppets of than me. The only thing I'd say is that back when we did Spitting Image, politicians were still held up on a pedestal. They were still held with some reverence, and I don't know quite what you would put in Donald Trump's mouth that would be an exaggerated version of what he's like already. What would you make him say? Which you'd say, well, that might be true. That might be actual verbatim Trump. So the point of the satire was to sort of distort the faults of the politicians and the celebrities. But these days, I worry that there's not much distortion left to do.
Joel?
Hi, Merlin. What inspired you to make Wallace and Gromit?
Well, I have to say that I didn't invent Wallace and Gromit. Nick Park created Wallace and Gromit, and it was a project he did actually at film school. He was at the National School of Film and Television, and he created Wallace and Gromit. And Wallace and Gromit are based on Nick's own, a lot of people he knew, and his sort of spin on relationships, especially with his father. And actually, Gromit was going to be a cat to begin with, not a dog. But Nick found that actually sculpting a cat in modelling clay was quite tricky, and it was easier to sculpt a dog. And so that's how Gromit came around. And I believe Gromit sort of the character of him, and Wallace, the main actual physical nature of him was based on the doorman of the National School of Film and Television, who sort of walked and presented himself a bit like Wallace. But for me, actually, making Wallace and Gromit, the reason I love making Wallace and Gromit is that Gromit is really, really the epitome of everything that is difficult about animation, all wrapped up into one, because he doesn't speak. You have to make the audience understand what he's thinking and feeling just by his physical performance. And that relies 100% on the animator's skill. You don't have a very talented voice artist sort of propping up the performance. And hopefully in our Wallace and Gromit movies, and Shaun the Sheep actually, where there's very little voice, you always know what the characters are thinking, and that is probably the biggest challenge and the most wonderful thing to try and create.
Do Henry?
So, my question is for Mark, and it's about the fire that broke out at Ardman. When the fire broke out, how hard was it to regain concentration and continue after the fire?
Okay, well, first of all, great name, Henry, because that's the name of my son. So well done for that. The fire itself was in a warehouse, actually, and I mean, I think Merlin probably knows a bit more about it than I do. But as Nick Park said at the time, the important thing about the fire was, even though there was some valuable props lost and some sort of iconic puppets, that no one was really hurt. No one died or anything. And I think it was a kind of shock. It was a shock to the company, which was obviously at an earlier stage of its development. But I think the important thing about Ardman is it's not a physical place. Or should I say it's not just a physical place. It's an idea. It's what you might now say it's in the cloud, if you like. It's about the characters and the films and the community of people who work there, and all the craft and all the talent there. So I think Ardman itself is you know, can exist above and beyond anything like a fire, and a fire could not hurt it or damage it.
Emma Latchford?
Hi, this question's for John. My dad has read an utterly impartial history of Britain at least 10 times, and he's a really big fan of you. And he's told me that in your book, An Utterly Impartial History of Britain, you write in your introduction that your history teacher went to the pub at lunchtime. Is that true?
That is true. He used to smell a beer in the afternoons and stare out the window. I mean, sometimes, you know, these were different times. This was a long time ago. And I think a lot of teachers used to go to the pub at lunchtime. I remember Mark and I once being at Edinburgh Festival and giving a talk to a load of students. And at lunchtime, we said, should we have a couple of beers? And we had a couple of beers. In the afternoon, we were trying to teach these students and we're getting all sleepy and stuck. So, yeah, different times. I'm very flattered that your dad has read my history books. They're sort of comic history books. My second follow-up one is dedicated to Mark, actually. Don't
get any royalties, though.
He doesn't get a penny out of it. That's the most important thing. But yeah, it's the idea was to be funny about history, and Mark and I were the first two script writers for the host on Have I Got News for You a long time ago, and we found that wrapping up facts with jokes and dealing with news stories with jokes makes it much more accessible. And I thought I could do the whole history of Britain like that. I could explain I could talk about the Battle of Waterloo and talk about ABBA. You know, and I do a history podcast now with Angela Barnes, the comic who hosts the news quiz, and we do a funny history podcast called We Are History, and it's the same approach, information but with a sugar coated with jokes. That's sort of what it's all about.
To Freddie.
Yeah. Hi. This is for Merlin. Why did you get into animation?
Morning, Freddie. Well, you know, it was a complete and utter accident. I wanted to be a pilot when I was your age, and so that's everything I wanted to do was about being a pilot. When I was a bit older, 16, I got work experience at the local flying club, and then I went to sort of actually pursue it as a career, and I found out that I was properly colourblind, which means that you can't ever be a professional pilot. So I was stumped. I don't know if you've ever seen there's a movie.
Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens to the young lad in that movie, and that was me. So I sort of had to realign my goals, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do after that, having taken such a blow to something I was dead certain I wanted to do. And so I sort of decided that I'd become a photographer. I was inspired by the National Geographic magazine and the amazing imagery that from around the world that these documentary photographers were producing. And so I set off to do A-levels in photography. And one day I had nothing to do at college, and a mate of mine in the year above said, "Oh, we've got this animation lecture. Do you fancy coming along?" And I thought, well, I've got nothing else to do. And so I snuck into the back. I wasn't invited. and I took part in, sort of secretly took part in this lecture, and it just blew my mind and lit all my creative fires. And all we did was make little flick books. We just made little things move on by flicking paper, and it kind of turned me around, and I thought that really interests me. And so I set about getting myself into film school, which I did, and the rest is history, if you like. So it was a complete and utter accident. And actually, I also never anticipated that I would be what you might term a commercial or professional animator, because when I started animating, there wasn't really a massive industry. You wouldn't have set out thinking, oh, I can make a living at this. And so sort of I thought I'd be a fine artist, sort of suffering for my art and being poor and making animation. But luckily I found that I was good at character animation, and I sort of veered into a more commercial, not that Aardman is, I mean, it is a commercial studio, but it's much more fiercely independent than we make family entertainment for everybody. So in that term, it's commercial. We do make television commercials as well. But it's a far, far distant thing from the sort of independent fine artist I thought I might be when I set out in this animation world. So yes, a happy accident, you might say.
To Tom.
My one's for Mark. Of all your achievements, was collecting an Oscar in 2006 the best?
Well, it was certainly. I didn't actually win, so that's. I think I should make that clear. It's a bit of fake news that I won, but we were up for an Oscar, and Pixar Inside Out won. But it was obviously very exciting to go to the Oscars and be on the red carpet and everything. But actually, you shouldn't make films to win Oscars. That's not why you make films. And I suppose the greatest achievement is when you watch it with an audience and you can see that audience are really enjoying it, particularly children, because they're a very tough audience. But you have to maintain a degree of humility about it. And I'll give you an example of why. When Shaun the Sheep was opened the first weekend, I was very excited, and I thought, I can't wait to go to an ordinary cinema and see it with lots of an ordinary audience, and I'll sit at the back. And I'll enjoy that audience and watch them as they watch my movie that I've directed. So I went to my local cinema and bought a ticket and went into the theatre, and I was the only one there. No one else was there. So I thought, what do I do now? Do I just stay and watch this film? So I had seen it a few times before, and just at the last minute, an old couple came in and sat behind me, and I thought, well, now I can't walk out of my own film, so I'm going to have to stay and watch it. And so I sat and watched it, the three of us, and they were behind me. But I have to say, at least they enjoyed it, and actually the film went on to be a great success. But it taught me a lesson about not taking yourself too seriously.
Okay, now we're on to Josh.
Hi there. My question is for John. At school, you wrote comedy for the school magazine and stood as a Labour candidate in the school's mock elections. At this time, did you ever think that you'd become an author, scriptwriter, and political campaigner?
No, that's a good question. It's true. I did all those things when I was 17 and ended up being sort of a lot what my life was about. I don't think that I thought, when I was 17, I don't think I believed that anyone would let me be a comedy writer. It is what I dreamed of doing, but in the end, I had to sort of really give it a go, and I found out about, radio as a way in. I remember when I was at university, this man, a bit like Mark and I and Merlin now, came to talk to us, and he wrote for The Guardian, and he was talking about writing commercially as a living. And he was sort of saying, well, you can't do it. You can't write commercially. There's not enough money in it. And it's like, he was basically putting us all off. I remember thinking how rubbish that was. And I wanted to contact him after I'd made a living writing, because you can do it if you have the wherewithal and the talent, dare I say it, and the tenacity. And if you keep putting yourself in the right place at the right time, eventually people like me, Mark and Merlin are going to get too old and have to move out of the way, and the next generation is going to have to come through. I didn't quite understand that when I was 17, but I think if you just get in the queue to be that person next, eventually you'll be running the thing that you aspire to do. if you're someone who's works hard, is nice, and will get opportunities come their way from being in the right place.
Katie?
Hello, Merlin. My question for you is, which character do you feel shares a similar personality as you?
Oh, crumbs. Gosh, so many to choose from. You know, in a strange kind of way, hopefully none of them, because they're all sort of wonderfully flawed and faulted. But I suppose the character that I like working the most is Gromit. Mainly because he's one I have a personal response to on screen the most out of all the characters that we've made, and so yeah, I think it has to be, and partly because when I started animating Gromit, you put a bit of yourself into the characters, and every animator who works in stop motion and in other types of animation, when you animate, you actually put a little bit of yourself in, and directors try as much as possible to cast animators when they know they're animators. You cast your animators a bit like actors to particular scenes and sequences, and so there are parts of Gromit which I feel that really is a bit of me acting and performing on the screen, albeit it's not my face. It's me sort of creating a performance through the puppet of Gromit, and all the other characters too. But I think Gromit in particular, because it like I said earlier, there's no voice. It's just you kind of creating that character on the screen.
Go to Ruby.
Hi, my question is for Mark. You've been the screenwriter for lots of children's movies, which I really enjoyed. Can you tell me why you like to write movies for children that also appeal to adults?
Thanks, Ruby. That's a nice question. I suppose I don't think of them as being children's movies. I'm glad that you enjoy them. I suppose we have this strange phrase in the film industry. We call it the family space. And we write films for families to enjoy. And as you rightly say, it's grown-ups can watch it and children can watch it. And I suppose, why do I write those films? Well, I have a family myself, and I enjoy watching those films myself, and I enjoyed watching them when I was growing up. I think they're films that can last a long time, that when you make a film like that, people will watch it for many, many years. I was involved in Madagascar, and people still watch that. And there's films that go back a long way. Wallace and Gromit's another one that people still watch, and Chicken Run. So yeah, I think I enjoy them because they're fun to work with. You work with lots of other people. It's very collaborative. So you get to work with lots of other people, and they're films that people have a lot of affection for. If you get it right, that is. I've written a few films that we won't talk about as well, but the ones that work well, then you always feel very proud of them, and it's nice to see them, turning up at Christmas on television or whatever.
On to Olivia Montgomery.
Hi, my question's for John. What made you change direction from theatre to writing?
Well, actually, I studied drama at university, and I'd been a child actor and been on a small few TV parts and things. I think actually seeing myself do it, so I saw myself on TV and I thought, oh, I'm not sure I'm that good. And then I did a bit of stand-up, and that was really just to try and get my comedy material out there. And again, I thought it was okay as a stand-up, but it was a pretty brutal sort of thing to put yourself through. And when I started getting success as a writer, I thought I'm a better writer than I am performer. So it was a question of still interested in the entertainment and comedy, but writing it and letting someone else perform it was what I realized I was better at. Bizarrely, late in my career, I've switched back to the theatre, and I've co-written a couple of musicals. So I'm back into the theatre now, and I've just written a play for myself. So I'm sort of heading back to the theatre, having done TV and books and newspaper columns. I'm just back into the one genre that is going to be completely closed down for the next 5 years, which would seem like a good career move at the time.
Emma Hewson?
Hi, my question's for Merlin. What would you consider your greatest achievement in your career?
Still being in it, I think. It's one of those things that as you go through a career, and especially in the creative arts, it's not a clear run thing. And I've been in the animation world for 24 years now, and I'm delighted that I'm still doing it and I still love it, and it's still challenging and difficult, because if it wasn't those things, it wouldn't be interesting. And so yes, all of that, and I still sort of find it amazing that it's possible to sort of defy the odds. And like John said, there's lots of people out there say, oh no, you shouldn't do that because it's not a real job, it's not, it's not a real thing. But actually it is perfectly sensible thing to do. And yeah, so I think that, I mean, there are sort of physical milestones, just like getting a job on my first feature film, Chicken Run. I was 21 or something, and it was a massive step for me. And I was given the job as lead animator on Mel Gibson's character, Rocky the Rooster. So taking on that kind of responsibility and sort of living up to that personally, those kind of things are, someone gives you a chance, you do your absolute maximum to make good on that opportunity. And it's those kind of things where you think, oh yeah, that, someone's believed in me and I've stepped up to the mark and I've done it. It's those kind of things. My first directing job and those kind of milestones. And taking on the creative directorship of Wallace and Gromit. Who'd have thought that I would sort of step into the role of Nick Park on a day-to-day basis, looking after Wallace and Gromit. And it's realizing that I'm not here to copy being Nick Park. I was chosen because he trusted my judgment on the things that need to happen on a day-to-day basis. So those kind of things, that those achievements that I look at, sort of stepping stones rather than one major thing across my career.
Poppy?
Hi, my question's for Mark. And where do you find your inspiration for your animations?
Thank you for that. Well, I mean, it's interesting what Merlin said, isn't it, about Wallace and Gromit, because Nick Park's dad was somebody who spent a lot of time in his shed at the bottom of the garden making gadgets, and we can see where Wallace came from. So there's this old saying that we writers have, which is write what you know. And I don't think that means literally, like I didn't grow up with a bunch of sheep, but at the same time, Shaun the Sheep, as an example, is actually is a family. And so, as I said earlier, I have a family, and I grew up in a family, and I know, and I sort of and I can write about what it's like to be in a family. So I guess that's a lot of the inspiration for the things that I write about come from my own life. And what I do is I kind of convert them into a different a way of portraying that idea. Whether it's to do with aliens, or whether it's to do with sheep, or whether it's to do with animals in a zoo. Really, I'm sort of writing about, in some ways, my own life, my own relationships. And I think that's what a lot of writers do.
Now, Dawson?
Hi all. My question's aimed at John. In your experience of writing books and script writing, which do you prefer?
I think I really enjoy the control of book writing. So when you write a screenplay or a TV script, you're just one part of the process, and the director might change it. The lighting director can change the mood of it. The editor can cut bits out, and the actors interpret it. But when you write a book, you are the writer, director, cameraman, mood, music. Everything is down to you. And the only thing that really can make it go wrong is that it's a wrong cover and, you know, have it badly laid out or something. But that total control, I feel, is a very satisfying. And so, you know, if it's your fault if it bombs, whereas all the other things we do, it's someone else's fault if it's a failure. We can blame the director or the editor or the actors. But these are, you know, these are great. I feel lucky to have had the chance to write in different genres, and because each one informs the other. And I've learned about screenwriting from writing books, and I've learned about writing books from having spent time doing, you know, well-structured screenplays, and they inform each other.
Now, Tamsin.
Hi. So my question's for Merlin. And so I once went to a grommet modelling workshop run by someone from Aardman, but then in the end my grommet ended up looking a bit drunk. So how do you make all your models look consistent?
Well, I try not to go to the pub at lunchtime. It's practice. So we use our hands. Actually, while I'm sat here, I've got a sculpting tool. We have sculpting tools, but it is practice. One of the reasons I ended up in stop motion animation was that when I was an animation student, I was taught to animate by a very good animator called Joanna Quinn, and she does drawn animation. Now I can draw, but it's not, I have to work hard at it. It's not a natural thing. What's in my head doesn't necessarily flow out to the end of my pencil. However, what's in my head does flow out to my fingertips as a sculpt. So, you know, I've got Morph here. There's Morph. I've just made him yesterday. And I can make a Morph almost without looking. I just sort of remembered what shapes my hands make, and it's just a very natural thing for me to do. So the way I stop my characters kind of going wrong or looking drunk or whatever is partly because it's the creative way that I naturally express myself, and so I have a reasonable amount of control over what's in my head coming out of my fingers. But practice, it's a lot of practice, and in some cases, you know, animators spend years and years and years before they actually get that control on the sculpt. You could say when we animate, and you know, with stop motion, it's you move it a bit, take a frame, move it a bit, take a frame. A pessimist would say it's 24 opportunities every second to totally destroy your puppet. And actually, what animators do is they have pictures, and actually drawn animators have it as well. It's called a model sheet, and so you have images of your characters from the side, from the front, from the bottom, from every angle, so that you have a reference, so you can always see what it's supposed to look like, and just keep track of it. So yeah, a bit of hard work, bit of talent, and mix it all together, and hopefully your characters kind of stay looking how you want them to stay looking.
To Archie.
Hi, my question's for Mark. Did you expect Wallace and Gromit in the Curse of the Were-Rabbit to win an Oscar in 2016 and for the Best Animated Feature and a BAFTA for Best British Film?
I don't think, as I said before, I don't think you could ever expect to win awards or to make a film thinking you're going to win awards. I will say that Nick Park has a reinforced trophy shelf. I mean, he's won many Oscars before for The Wrong Trousers and other Wallace and Gromit films. So I think the main thing was that when we were making the film, you never know when you're making a film. It's a very strange thing. It's like, I can describe it as like building a house with a blindfold on. You never really know what you're doing, how well it's going to turn out, until you step back from the building and you take the blindfold off. And either you hope you've made a nice house with four walls and a roof, but sometimes you've made a bit of a wreck. But I think with Wallace and Gromit, it came out surprisingly well. It was directed by Steve Box and Nick Park, and they did a fantastic job on it. I think once the film came out, we knew it was a good film, and I think what was the biggest pleasure was to see how successful it was and how well it did, particularly in the UK. And then when it sort of went on to win those awards, that was obviously a great moment. It was a very proud moment for Aardman and for Britain, really, because it showed that, you know, we could make films that were the sort of world beating and that people wanted to see all around the world.
Nigel Dando, would you like to ask a question now?
Yeah, morning everyone. Question for John, really. We've got a lot of budding journalists here listening to you, John. And I think you mentioned that you used to do some newspaper work, some newspaper columns. What was that all about?
That was came out of my first book, which was like a sort of political memoir, and it was a sort of comic take on my years losing elections for the Labour Party. And so that book was a sort of hit, and so the Guardian offered me a column, and so I had a weekly column writing about sort of funny things in the news, and it was I would never call myself a journalist because I never did that sort of thing, but this was just like a piece of commentary every week. But it was a thing that one opportunity came out of another. And the thing about writing a book when I'd never written a book, or sending in sketches to radio when I'd never written for radio, you have to just put yourself into these positions to get these opportunities. Turn up to the animation meeting even if you might not be interested in it, or go along to the radio open meeting just in case, and don't wait for anyone else to suggest you for a job. Push yourself forward, because there'll always be some probably a boy. I wish I had the confidence to put myself forward. So don't wait for anyone else to suggest you. You suggest you yourself, and you'll be surprised how many times people go, yeah, maybe we could give them a go.
Good words, John. Thanks very much.
Would Mrs. Dads like to ask a question now as well?
To any of you, really. We're always looking for ways as teachers to develop, encourage the creativity in our own children and our own students. Any advice for us as teachers that we can pass on to our students, and that the students here who are already fairly creative can pass on to their mates?
I suppose one of the first things is to allow and I know it's difficult with a very packed curriculum, but to allow the time for children to be creative. And that's something important even for us as professionals, that we need to create the space that we can actually do the writing, because often everything else crowds in and it's very easy. We have this phrase that we use called avoidance, which is where we'll find any excuse not to work. We'll drink coffee, go out, look at the garden, read the newspaper. And so you need to create that quality time when you can actually think creatively and be creative. And I think then maybe in terms of setting some specific tasks, even if it's something as simple as something quite short or small, that you just have to do to get over that thing. Because one of the things about being creative is it's getting over that hump. We all have these voices in our head which tell us that we're not good enough or we can't do things that well. And I think we have to get over that hump, and you have to just do something. And so it's good to actually have created something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard with teachers. I was chair of governors at a school for 8 years, and I know how much pressure teachers are under, and how much admin there is. But the teachers that I admired most were the ones who found things in students that other teachers hadn't spotted. Got them to do things that maybe surprised the students themselves, and saw potential in students that the students themselves might not have seen. So to always be looking out for the quiet talent, the surprising area of self-expression that might be in there, and of course, I'm sure all teachers don't need to telling this, but an education isn't about how many GCSEs you get and about how many certificates you end up with. It's about the whole person and about socializing. And this sort of socializing that we're doing here now is, just as valuable as the stuff that's coming out of our mouths. Just to work together and be someone who can work in teams and be a fully rounded human being is, worth more than a first-class degree from Oxford.
And I would say that maintaining, especially for the creative things, is just to encourage the feeling of abandonment sometimes that comes from just letting loose, and again, that's quite often quite hard in the school environment. But for the creative process, even if it doesn't mean going physically crazy. It just means letting ideas run that possibly people might feel silly about, and it's being able to sort of have an idea and share it can be quite a personal and a nerve-wracking experience. If you think, oh God, it's not any good, but actually it's just someone else's opinion, and the creative environment should embrace other people's opinion and discussion about that opinion, and that can express itself through painting or sculpting or whatever. But for everyone sort of feel that they're embraced to make mistakes and enjoy it, and that, but it's all good, really. But
can I jump in and just, I think that's very important what Merlin said. I think one thing I'd say is, and this is speaking as somebody who's made a living out of being creative, it's all right to fail. There's a phrase that I use which sustains me, which is success grows in the garden of failure. And the thing about being creative is a trial and error process. And I think sometimes children can do something and not get it right, and that makes them feel they haven't got the ability or they don't feel good about it. But that's okay, that's part of the process. So it's actually okay to fail. It's a trial and error thing, and being creative is something that develops, and you can keep trying and keep going at.
And what you see from a studio like Aardman is the end product. You see something that looks hopefully funny and good and engaging, but the journey to get there is long, hard work. It's a road of mistakes and getting it wrong, and the thing we put out into the wide world that you will get to see is a sort of a highly polished sort of top of the pyramid of lots and lots of things that have gone wrong on the way, and so it sort of makes us look really, really good. But to get there, what we've had to do is step over and embrace failure all the way, and sort of identify the successes and push those to the top as we go.
Now, Jack Clark, have you got a question?
Hi, I've got a question for John. So, who and what inspired you to start writing?
That's an interesting question, which I do get asked occasionally, and I never have a very good answer. I suppose my parents, my dad, I lived in a home where there were a lot of jokes, and there was a lot of laughter, and there were a lot of books. But then I would watch sitcoms on TV, and I remember writing down the stories from them when I was quite young, like 10, and I'd say this was what happened in my diary. So I was obviously always interested in the script rather than the performance or the signature tune or whatever. But then, as you know, I got into, when I was 16, I loved Monty Python, and I loved so all the sitcoms of the 70s, like Porridge and 40 Towers and The Lightly Lads. They probably mean nothing to you, but this was TV comedy, and I always dreamed I'd write a TV comedy. Mark and I got a script, and we got a star in it. We got a slot on BBC One, and it was a flop. And it was like Mark said, you don't know whether you've built a beautiful house or a rickety shed. And then we got a phone call. I got this phone call from our show was quite popular in Belgium, apparently. I got this phone call the day that our show was cancelled. This guy said, "Hello, I am Jan from Belgium. Your show is so funny." I was going, "Who is this? Is this Pete? Is it my brother?" "No, we love your show in Belgium. It's top comedy in Belgium. Why are you so funny?" And it was like, okay, well, our show is big in Belgium. You can't have everything. What inspired me, I suppose, I must have had some belief at some level that I was being funny when I was mucking around at drama college, or the stuff I wrote down was half decent. And it was that having the confidence and the courage, really, to put it under someone else's nose. And you get better from doing it. So I look at the stuff I wrote when I was 20 and I think, God, this is terrible. But it had something, but it just wasn't ready, you know. But you get better. You get better. So if you've got a mate who draws drawings and you want to write, you know, team up and put something together. Or if you are someone who likes to do, you know, journalism, put together a little paper about this, or just as long as you keep doing it, keep putting yourself into a place where you're trying stuff out, I think you get better and your confidence goes up.
Now, Sophie.
Hello. My question's for Merlin.
Good morning.
Out of all the films you have been a part of, which film was your favourite and why?
I think Chicken Run holds a very special place in my heart, just because as a studio we had no idea what we were letting ourselves in for. We'd made short films and half-hour films, but going into a feature film, it's not just 2 or 3 times the work. It's a monumental project with hundreds and hundreds of people coming together all to create a movie. And we were collectively much younger and sort of full of enthusiasm, and it was such a fantastic journey to go on. We were sort of felt like we were exploring new territory. We weren't exploring new territory. Loads of people had done it before, but for us as a group, now that same crew has gone on to make a lot of the crew who still make our feature films today were involved in Chicken Run back along, and so we've kind of got more experience and better at it. But that first experience of diving into such a massive thing that was put out around the world, and that was the other exciting thing. You know, we were working in a very large shed just outside Bristol to make this film that was going to go out as a worldwide movie, and that in itself was, you know, phenomenally exciting.
Now, Amy?
Hi, my question is for Mark, and it's, what has been your favourite animation you've created and why?
Always a tough question. You know, it's a bit like being asked, you know, which is your favourite child? Because you sort of love them all in different ways. And obviously I have a fondness for Shaun the Sheep. I didn't create Shaun the Sheep. The story of Shaun the Sheep is that Shaun was a character in the Nick Park Wallace and Gromit special. And then Richard Starzak, who's another colleague of ours, me and Merlin, he created the series of Shaun the Sheep. And I came along quite late, so I can't even really boast that I created it. But I kind of came into the Shaun world, and I think the reason why I'm proud of the Shaun the Sheep film is we didn't know when we made that film. We wanted to make, as Merlin said, you know, Morph is kind of silent, and Gromit is silent, and Shaun the Sheep is kind of silent. And we wanted to tell a whole story that would make people sit still in one place for maybe 75 to 80 minutes without any words. And we didn't know if that would work or not. And so it was a very big test of how you tell a story. And we watched lots of old silent movies from the old days, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and so on. We thought, well, those guys did it and they did it brilliantly, so why can't we do it? So we sort of did it. It was very difficult, and we were worried that maybe people would get bored. They wanted to hear somebody talking, but it felt like in the end, we managed to create a whole story. So I guess that would be my answer in terms of my work with Aardman, that the Shaun the Sheep movie is the one I'm proudest of, even though I love all of the Aardman films, even the ones that I wasn't necessarily directly involved in.
Now, Olivia Finch.
Hiya, this is a question for all of you, and I was wondering, what are your ambitions or for the future? Have you got any films or books you've got your eyes on doing?
Well, I've just written the first, finished during lockdown, the first bit of on-spec writing I've done for 30 years. On-spec meaning no one's commissioned it, no one's expecting it. It's a project I've completely written on my own, and it's just printed out, and I'm sort of nervous about showing it to anyone. So to get that staged, I think, would be my ambition. I've never written a play on my own, and it's another genre to experiment with and learn about. So my ambition is to see that through, and after that, maybe to write another novel, because it's been a long time since I wrote a novel.
Okay, I'm going to say that just to have to be able to get up in the morning and still be allowed to work is a great thing in itself, like Merlin said. But I'm actually working on the next Paddington movie, and so I'm very excited about that. We've obviously had to stop work on it because of the pandemic, but we're hoping to get back to it. And you know, and it's another sort of character that is, I think, is a really lovely, iconic British character, and I'm very excited to be working on that film.
And I'm currently working on some Wallace and Gromit that's going to come out soon, towards the end of the summer, and that's in a digital form, a new way of storytelling that Wallace and Gromit are sort of hacking at the bleeding edge of technology with their modelling clay, but also Wallace and Gromit films in the traditional stop motion sense. Nick is along with Mark messing around with some new ideas, so I'm really looking forward to those in the future. And for me personally, my ambition is to one day direct my own feature film. That's something I haven't done as sole director yet, so that's an ambition for me.
Call me, Merlin. Call me.
Oh, call you, Mark.
Call me.
Yeah.
I should say that another Chicken Run movie is in the works, and a sequel after all these years.
Oh.
And I've co-written a couple of drafts of that. So maybe when they start animating again, you'll all be able to take your own children to it by the time it's finished.
Yeah, in fact, it is scheduled for production next year, so that it'll be on the screens before you know it.
And yeah, thank you so much to our three special guests today. But thanks so much for joining us, John, Mark and Merlin. It's been fantastic.
It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.